We're going to switch gears over to the defensive line now. Now, this unit has been on average better than during the Matt Campbell era. They've in general they've been a solid unit. They've had really good pass rushers in the past, and that's part of a big reason for it. You had Jaquan Bailey for a long time. That was one of the best, one of the best pass rushers in school history. I mean, arguably maybe the top five one for sure. I would say arguably second or third best maybe in school history as far as pass rushing goes. And then no doubt about it, Will McDonald, the the uh the sack machine himself, the Big 12 conference's all-time leading sack, um, all-time leading sack artist. And when you have guys, when you have complete and total game wreckers like those two guys, like Jaquan Bailey and Will McDonald, the defensive line's job gets a lot easier. Right now, I don't know if Iowa State has that game record on the team. Now that doesn't mean that they can't find one, or that doesn't mean that one can't emerge. But there isn't a guy that I'm looking at on the team right now that you can look at it like, okay, this is the guy that teams are going to have to game plan around. They're going to have to like Will McDonald was so good that teams had to warp their entire defensive game plan. Their entire protection scheme had to revolve around Will McDonald. And that was who they had to devote basically all of their attention to. And then then you just dealt with everybody else as you went. I don't think there's anybody on the roster right now. It's certainly not at this point in time that you're gonna look at like, okay, this is the guy as an edge rusher. Now, there is a guy on the roster in this position on the defensive line that is someone that you have to game plan around, but he's in the interior, and that is Dominic Orange. Dominic Orange I think he's primed for an first team all Big 12 type of season. He's I would say it's defensive line just because of the scheme is never going to be a unit you're going to see him, rack up a ton of sacks, outside of an aberration like Will McDonald and Jaquan Bailey. You're not typically going to see a lot of sacks. The interior defensive linemen are not going to rack up big numbers. You're going to see if you see a tackle or two in a game, that's pretty much where they're going to be at. Sometimes they just don't register a tackle during the game, but I would say its defensive tackles are vital to the system. And as run stoppers, as guys that eat up double teams, that free up space for other pass rushers, they're critical to that defensive line into the rest of the defensive scheme. Really, actually, really the center of the defensive scheme, the nose tackle, the middle linebacker, and the high safeties are the backbone of that defense. So having a guy like Dominic Orange there coming back is hugely valuable. Now, the bummer from last season is that you do lose J.R. Singleton, who played a million snaps for Iowa State last season. He not just last season, but his whole career, he's played just a ton of snaps, and he played really, really good football. He was the starter. He absolutely deserved to be. He was amazing last year, but he did deal with some injuries for a couple. I think he missed one game, missed that Kansas game, which turned out to be really bad, a really bad game to miss. It can be difficult to replace a guy like that just you can just put him in there and you can count on him to do his job every single time. And he was a solid pass rusher when you asked him to be, but in more than anything, he always did a great job of managing his run fits and making everybody else's life easier on the defensive line, making life easier for the linebackers as well. So replacing a guy like that is tough, but I think they've got a couple guys. Obviously, Dominic Orange, I expect to slide in to be that primary presence in the center of the defensive line. Now, Dominic Orange is a better pass rusher than J.R. Singleton was. He is an explosive athlete that can absolutely wreck games on the defensive line. We saw one of his best plays of the season against Iowa on that goal line stand where he just blasted right through the middle of it and completely blew up that play around the goal line. And you can use his athleticism just jumps off the page every single time you watch him, you put his tape up on the screen. Dominic Orange is an unbelievably good player. And I know for a fact that he got some major, major offers from SEC and Big Ten schools this season because they, believing that he can be a dominant SEC football player. Um, Dominic Orange is a guy that I think has a major chance to make an impact, not just as like a first team All Big 12 caliber defensive lineman, but maybe even on the national stage, maybe being in line, being on watch list for awards and things like that. Behind him is, I think I would assume the guy behind him is going to be Zamir Hawk, who played he played a good chunk of snaps as a redshirt freshman. They were really excited about him. There was at times where he looked like a redshirt freshman, where he was a little bit out of position, didn't maintain his run fit as well as he maybe should have, but otherwise did just a really, really nice job for what he was asked to do. And I think now that you have him basically penciled in, penned into the starting 2D, maybe, Iowa State likes to, you can see on this depth chart here, they have a nose guard and a defensive tackle, designated. Maybe this is a situation where Dominic Orange stays there and Zamir Hawk fills in right there at the defensive tackle spot with J.R. Singleton, and you play them right next to each other. I think that would be a really nice 1-2 punch there at the defensive tackle spot. There's a number of guys they brought in. Cannon Butler is a guy I assume is going to get some play. He'll get some significant playing time on the defensive line. He's only at 241 pounds, so he's going to be an edge rusher. I don't think he can fit in on the defensive tackle spot. You've got a few other guys on the roster right now that have the size to do it. You look at like Elijah Carnell, who's there sitting there at the backup for J.R. Singleton. I should clarify, this depth chart that I'm should have on the screen right now is the end of season depth chart. So this is functionally the depth chart as of right now. This isn't like a spring depth chart. It's not the one from the beginning of the season. This is the depth chart basically as it sits right now, minus the seniors. So, Elijah Carnell is right there. He's 6'5", 290. He's going to be a redshirt sophomore. That's a guy you're going to look at as being, a factor in there. I don't know exactly what they're going to want to do with like an Akene Eziogu. He's 6'5". He's at 270 on the roster. So he's a little smaller than you would typically see for the defensive tackle spot, but he's a little bit bigger than you would typically see for an edge rusher. I would assume that will mean he will probably stay. I think they'll move him around. I would guess they'll get him on the field for sure. He could probably play inside if a guy needed a breather. But if J.R. Singleton, or not, sorry, if Dominic Orange and Zamir Hawk are on the field at the same time, Kenny Eziogu will be playing on the outside. Braden Simonson is another guy. He's 6'3", 275. He's in there. Obald Nyankuru, that's a tough name to pronounce, 280. Xavier Hamilton's 305. You've got some size there, but, most of these guys that they recruit are typically like kind of hybrids that they can move inside, outside, where you're hanging around at the 250 to 270 pound range. You do have some young cats in the room though. And that transfer in, Cannon Butler said from UNI, he'll be an edge rusher. So Cannon Butler right here he's the transfer from UNI, 6'6", 241, pretty good size. He was productive at Iowa State. I think he's a guy that can, is he going to be a starter? I don't know. He's not necessarily in the, he's just brand new to the defensive system. We'll see. They're not going to bring him in if they don't think he can contribute. Like I said, I don't know if he's a starter right away, if he's more just a rotation player, but I would be shocked if we didn't see him on the field, in August against Kansas State and Ireland. So All Gas No Breakfast brought up another name here that I think is worth talking about, which is Samuel Same. He's going to be going into he's going to be a redshirt junior this season. So he's been in the program for a few years. His issue is he's always been a little undersized. He's kind of had the Will McDonald problem where he just hasn't been able to put on the weight. But he's right now on the roster, he's 6'5", 225, right up here. 6'5", 225, which, good height, a little light for the defensive end spot. So if he can put on a little bit of weight this offseason, get up to 235, 240. 240 is a big difference from 225 when you're talking about this kind of thing, as long as you can keep your athleticism. So this is a guy I think absolutely can figure into the pass rusher, equation. Another guy that has been in the program for a long, long time and used to be a linebacker and he moved to be to an edge rusher last season, before last season, which is Miles Mendezun there. He's going to be going into his last season as a redshirt senior. It would not shock me to see him start, given his experience, and I think they really think he can do quite a lot. He's a very athletic. Like I said, he was a linebacker. He's a very athletic guy, and if he's got the motor for it to really pin his ears back, and I think he can be a good pass rusher there. But that's really the entire question for Iowa State on this defensive line is, where is your pass rush coming from? Is it going to be from the edge rushers? Is it going to be from stand-up rushers like a Caleb Bacon or like a Will McLaughlin or something like that? Are you going to use your linebackers primarily as your pass rushers? Can you find a guy on the defensive line that can do what Will McDonald or Jaquan Bailey did, where they can be a dominant, they can win their one-on-one battles often enough where you can let other people cause more chaos on the other side of the offensive line, and teams have to game plan for him? They need to figure that out because, like I said, last season they did not do a good job of getting to the quarterback. Now, this season should be different because, knock on wood here, your linebackers are all healthy. Everybody's healthy, which was by far the biggest issue for the defense last year. Now, it wasn't necessarily personnel. It wasn't it wasn't anything in particular as far as like one this person failing, this person failing, this person failing. When you have so many injuries across the board, at virtually every position, I mean, the secondary wasn't completely banged up. Well, I shouldn't even say that because Bo Freeler had a lot of problems. Malik Verdon had tons of injuries. They were the healthiest group, but you still lost two of your starters towards the end of the season. They played, Bo Freeler played the bowl game and all that, obviously, but he was banged up all the hell, and Malik Verdon didn't play in a few games. But the linebackers, we'll talk about them on the next edition of the state of the program here. I think there's potential here, but you got to find rushers that can get to the quarterback, guys that can win one-on-one matchups. Maybe it's Samuel Same. I think Trey Verdon, who is the younger brother of Malik, 6'2", 225. He's the same size as Samuel Same, but a freshman that's undersized is a lot different than a redshirt junior that's undersized. I wouldn't, unless he just is really, puts on a decent bit of weight this summer and it just has an unbelievable spring and fall practice. I don't know if you're going to see Trey Verdon much this season, and I think that's okay. Kamori Moore has the size to play, 6'2", 295. He's got the size to play right away. Just depending on where his head's at as far as how well he's understanding his run fits within the defense. Because, like I said, he'll be in the interior with Dominic Orange and Zamir Hawk. You got to be a really smart player when you're in there. Otherwise, you can give up way too much through the interior of that defensive line if they're not paying attention to where they need to be on their run fits. So they've got guys there, but you got to find your pass rushers, no matter how that comes. If you find a bunch of guys on the defensive line that are good at run stopping and good at keeping their fits, but you don't find a dominant pass rusher, that means you're using your linebackers as stand-up edge rushers. And that's okay. There's lots of teams that have good success doing that. You have the personnel to do that. Caleb Bacon, Will McLaughlin, Cooper Ebel, Caleb Rosina. You have lots of guys that can be good, pass rushers from the linebacker spot. But if you can find a really good pass rusher on your defensive line in this scheme, that makes a mountain of difference. And it'll make Eli Rashid's life a lot easier on the defensive line. So there's potential here, but you've got to figure it out on the pass rushing side. They did an okay job run stopping. They weren't awesome. They gave up a lot of run. They gave up some stuff earlier in the year because they played against some good running teams. So they kind of got a bad rap as a run defense last year for a while because they played against some really good running backs. You played Caleb Johnson and RJ Harvey and a bunch of other guys that were just ridiculous. So the stats aren't as friendly to Iowa State as they probably should be, because they were a better run defending unit than people gave them credit for. But yeah, so promise there, but we'll see what they do.